Hello, 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 and welcome back to Gretawa TV, where we will be continuing our discussion on what it means to be KhoiSan in post-apartheid South Africa. Today we will be kicking off our discussion on the KhoiSan identity by looking at the Khoi people first. So today I would like to debunk a few misconceptions that number one, Khoi people or KhoiSan people do not have or claim ownership to land, and two, whether or not black people can be considered Khoi or San. So let's start off with Khoi people. The Khoi people were a group of pastoralists, meaning that they were farmers that had livestock that migrated southwestern from Zambezi Valley in Tanzania, southwestern into southern Africa, and eventually settled in Mossel Bay. They were also the first to come into contact with the Dutch, and this we can say was during the 14th century when Vasco da Gama's ship eventually washed up ashore in Mossel Bay. This encounter was violent in nature because Vasco da Gama's crew used the natural resources and water resources without asking the necessary permission from the Khoi people. Here we can see that they already claim ownership to the land and within their vicinity, and have claim ownership to natural fresh resources. So the notion that Khoi people live in harmony with nature without necessarily claiming ownership is already debunked here in this first encounter that they had with the Dutch people. The second contact that they had with Dutch people, or explorers as they were called, were fruitful, and this lasted 165 years. It was so fruitful that the Dutch saw it necessary to build a relationship with the KhoiSan people, and they took Khoi, the KhoiSan king, on a voyage to meet Sir Thomas. And on this ship, or on this voyage, Khoi, a KhoiSan king, learned how to speak English, and during this voyage he refused to answer questions about his people, and he refused to say anything that would be to their detriment. When he met Sir Thomas and when he was within their company, he realized that there was an unfair trade system. The Khoi would trade their livestock, their water resources, for iron trinkets or brass trinkets and jewelry, pieces that they did not even find valuable. And from this point onwards, they became known as a group of people that drive a hard bargain. And as time progressed, Jan van Riebeeck also landed at the Cape Point, and this is where they now realize that they can actually start exploiting the Khoi people. So Jan van Riebeeck landed in 1652. In 1657, that's 5 years later, he decided that they needed to be separated, the Dutch needed to be separated from the Khoi people, and he had a castle built of stone, from stone. He grew a wild almond hedge, and this was to keep the Khoi off their land as well as their animals, to keep them from grazing on this land. In the same year, Van Riebeeck also released Dutch contractors, and they were told to go farm around the Riebeecks River area. And this led to friction, because now the Dutch saw the land as theirs, when all along the land was considered the land of the Khoi. In 1672, the friction was so bad that the Khoi people were forced to sign treaties that give up their land, that would render their livestock to the Dutch and allow the Dutch into their domestic lives. And this is why in the KhoiSan or colored community, people literally these days, when they consider police Boere, And Boere, as everyone knows it, Boers is a group of white Afrikaans speaking people, or what in that time it was white Dutch speaking people. So that's where the notion of "Ek gaan nie boere vir jou bel" comes in. And during this time, this is where a lot of my people started fleeing into the inlands of South Africa. So they moved from the coastal areas and moved into the inlands because now they were forcefully removed from their areas. So here we can see that KhoiSan people or Khoi people were not necessarily people that were nomadic, that moved from space to space where there was grazing for their animals, but we can see that there is this violent movement or violent erasure, violent removal of them from where they stayed because of the Dutch. So what would happen is the Dutch would move into a new territory because the conflict was so dense and so intense. They would usually shoot the Khoi people, and there was a point in time where they were rewarded for cutting off the lips of the Khoi people, cutting off the heads of the Khoi people, and just being rewarded for killing as many Khoi people as they possibly could, because they did not consider the Khoi people as human back then. So most of the Khoi people fled into the hinterlands, and this is where my group of people come from. We are the Karoo dwellers. We live in the Karoo areas because most of my forefathers have been pushed violently from spaces that we occupied. And during this time, the Dutch realized that they're now losing cheap labor because they forced the Khoi people to work in their kitchens. They forced the Khoi people to work their vineyards, to work their lands for them at a cheap rate, or they would do the dopstelsel. The dopstelsel is where they would pay the Khoi people in alcohol. They would reward them in alcohol for a day's work. And this is also, I believe, why colored people and people of color are so addicted and dependent on alcohol, because they were paid on it and in it, and from there our genetics developed to be dependent on it, because there was no food. So obviously you would just drink your pain away, you would drink your hunger away. And during this time, when they realized that they were losing cheap labor, they invented the system where they put the women in the kitchens of the boss or of the master, and the women's children would then be booked in, unbooked style, so would be booked in till the age of 25 and could not leave the master's home. So here we can see that in this time a lot of assimilation would happen, a lot of adoption would happen, of cultural adoption. So this is why I believe that the notion of the new colored or the new KhoiSan developed from there, or the new Khoi developed from there, because there was a lot of cultural assimilation. There was a new development of languages, and I believe that the Afrikaans language was mostly developed in these kitchens. In the next episode, we will be focusing on the San people, and then we will deal with KhoiSan as a whole. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion on the Khoi people. Thank you.